Thomas Christopher, an independent scholar, combination industrial vision on branding for regional studies as an integrative discipline.
So what I'm going to talk to you about is based on my experience as a regional practitioner. So in my work in Virginia, in a single region, in a rural region outside of Washington, D.C., I've met with plant managers and CEOs and done all of the kind of networking that has been discussed here. And so my comment for you would be, in the States, you have civic associations, you have, like, I'm a Rotarian, so those organizations, peer groups, my father was in a foreman's club, so we were in an industrial city, so there was a foreman's club. So peer networks are important. And the point about being trusted. So when I went to this rural area, I was given some good advice by somebody who said, you have to prove that you're a regular person. Yes. You have to go to church and be an usher. And once they understand that you're a regular person, then they'll listen to your crazy ideas. I've been a practitioner, but I came to regional studies in 2005 because I was trying to understand where American regional policy was coming from, because it didn't really make sense compared to what we were doing on the ground in Virginia. So the title here, and I realized that regional studies is primarily subnational development, but in reality, companies are all global. No matter how small you are, you're working in the Eurozone, or you're sending, you're visiting trade fairs as a city or a region or something like that. So I'm trying to do here is really go beyond the triple helix. What I'm going to present to you is a consequence of my practice. We were given this idea of think globally, act locally, which emerged in the 60s and 70s as a paradigm for the environmental movement. So these are some of the, I graduated from college in 1968, so these were books that I read and studied in this period. And it's said that even though intellectually humans knew that the Earth was a sphere, it wasn't until they saw the photographs that it was really verified. I think globally, act locally was a great paradigm for its time, but very often the local scale is too small for the issue. So beginning in 2000, I flipped things around a little bit, and one of the things I was confronted with in the States was I was told that the regions we had were all wrong. So I went to geography looking for the right regions, and there are all kinds of systems, but there's no single way to define a region. So I found a book in which EGUS said there is but one region, the surface of the Earth. So from that view, then everything is a subregion of the planet. And that kind of makes sense to me. And then you are dealing with political geography. So if all politics are local, and this is our local planet, then we're all in this together at some level. Okay, so there's no, we used to be able to ignore the consequences of our behavior in other countries. Well, that's harder to get away with these days, but of course it's still being done. So we need plans, we need visioning, and so regional studies and goal setting. But what I can tell you from my own experience as a planner is that goals do not come from the data. You can do all the analysis in the world, but that doesn't give you your goal. It just tells you, where you are, but that doesn't, like the idea of the drama festival that was invented 50 years ago in a little community in Oregon. That idea didn't come from the data. And these are the kinds of entrepreneurial things done for community that are so important. Now, here's a big old statement here at the bottom. And, in my career, I was with the American Planning Association, but I also belong to the World Future Society, which is a good multidisciplinary stretching point. So, but when it comes to a plan, there is really no end state plan for a locality. So Okay, when all the blocks are filled, then we're done. No, we're not, because the human intent is the perpetuation of life, not extinction or even a decline in civilization. So although we do want to grow, the minimum is that we don't decrease, or we don't decrease significantly. So I live in the town of Front Royal, so I'm a voter there, and I also vote for elected officials in Warren County, and then I also elect people for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and then I also vote for the president. So I have all these identities, and they all have to work together, really. But there's competition between the levels, and so we want to get actually beyond that. So in 1968, the Commonwealth of Virginia organized the state into 22 planning districts along the map there. The region here that's number 23 was actually two combined later, that they put them together. Now, the study that led to this was begun 50 years ago, which coincides with the RSA anniversary. So the shift to regional, the need to work across boundaries, and the difficulty of consolidation. And when this system was done, the head of it was the president of Virginia Tech, and the political scientists wanted to push consolidation, but he pushed them to set up this planning system. And so the region that I worked in for 35 years is up here. It's the northern Shenandoah Valley, 60 miles west of Washington. But when I began there in '73, it was very rural. But it was still impacted by the Washington metropolitan area. There were 20 local governments, and few had plans. But the Commonwealth of Virginia had a history of promoting planning by its local governments for economic development. They had to plan, do infrastructure to be prepared, and I'll give you some data later. The philosophy was really quite successful. So here's my region, and this is how we are placed in the Mid-Atlantic. Okay, so this is looking at the Mid-Atlantic from the various regional groupings. Now, Virginia's system is complete and the strongest of all of these. Some of there are various levels of the quality of the regions, but again, Virginia's entire strategy is entirely productive, and I think it's a good model for many people to consider. And these relationships represent very strong networks built over a period of 20, 30, 40, 50 years. That's important. So my experience then was that at first there was a fear of planning, that it was an attempt to consolidate and get rid of the local governments. But over time, because the state provided a subsidy, that they gained the local governments gained comfort with each other. So you talk about social cohesion. Well, if people live in different cities, they may not talk to each other, may not have any reason to talk to. So you have to build the region as a communications device. So by the 1990s, we were doing things and having results, and that led to me developing these three what I call theses about cooperation. And so what I found is that community precedes cooperation. My job was to sell cooperation. It was very difficult. But over time, as people work together, so if you want to do something bigger, you go out and you build community. You find the people, you want to do a paper, you want to do this, you find the people that have similar interests, so you build community first, and then cooperation follows. And my second, again, we're doing grand thesis here, is that community is in fact how life solves all problems. So if you looked at civilist biology, the ones that evolve and cooperate, they live, and the ones that don't. And finally, my third thesis is that security is the primary purpose of community. We don't survive as individuals. We survive as a group. And cooperation is entirely fundamental to the human species. Everything in this building, everything that we look at is entirely a product of cooperation. So, and competition is important. So a lot of people posit, competition competes. It's either competition or cooperation. Well, competition actually makes you stronger, but the thing is it has to be a level playing field. So you want a competition to be fair. So I wrap all of this stuff into what I call community motive, as opposed to the profit motive. And so I had this idea of this term, so I searched for it, and the only place I found it on the internet was this quote, which is from Aldo Leopold from 1944. So acts of conservation without the requisite desire and skills are futile. To create these desires and skills, the community motive is the task of education. So it's a matter of we do the right thing for the right reason. We do it for community. So this community motive is what I would say is everything outside of the helix. Whether you want to call it the fourth helix, I would call it community motive. And because the most important things you do in life you don't get paid for. The things your mother did and your grandmother did and you will do. So the profit motive is important, but the community motive is more important. That's the atmosphere in which you live. So, okay, that's the background of how I got to this. But the inspiration for this particular thought comes from the American Association of Geographers meeting, where I attended a session on planning and geography. And of course, I was a planner and really didn't know I was a geographer, because I got into planning not from the geography side. But Michael Storper was on this panel and asked the question, could planning and geography cooperate? Could they work together? Or are they ships in the night, So, passing. So, that got me thinking about, well, not just planning and geography, but what about all these other disciplines? So, why would we work together anyway? Well, again, these are bigger, say, the tacit goals of civilization: human community development, design, operation, and maintenance of the built environment, evolutionary progress, and advancement over time. So what this community motive is important. And so what other disciplines would contribute to that? Well, you have economics, sociology, anthropology, water science, atmospheric science, engineering. So these are the disciplines that really need to be integrated so that our planet's going to work and we survive. So here's how many disciplines are there? Well, this is just the outline from Wikipedia. So here are we, instead of ships passing in the night, could the social sciences or all of these, could it be like a convoy all heading in the same direction? Instead of, we talk to each other, could we all be heading in the same direction? So, but the question is, who's the admiral of this fleet? Who's going to manage this process? Who will lead? But this is a community thing, so it really isn't going to be something that can be led, but rather, who's capable of facilitating multidisciplinary studies? Well, I think looking at some of the key terms, this is the Ngram viewer. I don't know how valid a research tool it is, but I found it interesting. So the terms development and government, long history in publication, planning, regional competition, cooperation. These emerged around 1800s, 19. So these are relatively new terms, and so development is high, but economic development itself is low on the spectrum here. And then if we look at planning itself, you have county planning, metropolitan, national planning, state planning, and then regional planning. So look at the importance of this concept of regional. Okay, but regional is a word. If you look on Google Words, you can't monetize regional, right? So it's a important term, but it covers such a territory that it's hard to get things going. So what I did is a key term review by journal using the Taylor and Francis materials, just to get a sense of these 5 keywords: planning, competition, cooperation, collaboration, and then planning, cooperation, regional. What's the occurrence? And this is just the general search of titles. So in all the Taylor and Francis journals, over a million uses of the word plan. And so, planning is endemic, but isn't working together. So looking at these terms individually, and I looked at 5 journals. So the Journal of Planning, 44% key. Spatial economics was highest in terms of competition. Territory, politics, and governance rates high in the topic of cooperation, as it does in the topic of collaboration. So when we put the terms together, planning, cooperation, territory, politics, and governance, this new journal seems to be integrating many of these terms that we need in a way to achieve the greater goals that we have. And it's interesting that spatial economic analysis here is all about region and regional, but not about planning and cooperation. Okay, so again, competition is not a bad thing, so you can focus on competition, but again, so here's the final picture. Okay, I got plenty. This is the last slide here, so we can spend some time on. Here's the argument that I'm presenting. What I'm trying to say is that the disciplines of planning and regional studies, their objective, the inherent objective of any of these studies is to facilitate cooperation for the purpose of a better economy. So it's an implicit goal of planning or regional studies that the outcome is cooperation. So if you take your implicit and most important goal and you say this is the cooperation industry, but I'm talking about an industry that's without an SIC. Okay, in the States they had SIC codes and then they moved to NACS. So I don't know if there's anything new or anything, but it's industrious cooperation across the spectrum of human existence and human life, so that we all get to live here and we achieve some kind of balance on this, limited local planet, because it is our local planet, and if all politics are local, well, it's up to us to figure this out here. So, again, I'm saying that greater cooperation is needed for the management of the natural, the built, and the social environments. I think the social regional studies approach, which was formalized in the 50s, so regional science and regional studies, and the problem that I think regional science has is I believe they thought, okay, if we do the analysis so well, the answer is so obvious that no politics would be involved. It's just, that's what you do. But politics gets involved, and I think that's the strength of regional studies, because it acknowledges the political nature of decisions, and that has to be included. So there's, and I asked yesterday if there was a methodology for multidisciplinary activity, and that's not been fully. So there may need to be developed. So what we do need is cooperation, and again, so I think I've done my time.
Yeah.
So
Thank you very much. We got 1 minute for questions. or we go half an hour for coffee. So that's the deal. What do you think? Question? Very quick.
Planning you included, but maybe today people use wrong words like policy analysis or evidence-based policy. It seems like the word planning is sometimes not so popular. Do you consider any other words to use instead of planning?
Well, again, I understand the problem with planning, and then because there are so many types of planning, very often the question is what's the authority of the organization that's doing the planning. So in my early career, the planning that I did is for public consumption. So there's public planning and there's production planning and there's how do you get stuff down to assembly line. So again, if in Europe, in other parts of the world, where planning is more of a technocratic thing, the planners have a lot more authority. In the States, the planner is, the ultimate planners are the elected officials that make decisions. So planning is advisory to elected officials. Elected officials are really the ultimate planners in most cases. So it's a question of who owns the public planning process. And again, if it's working to invest for building an industrial park or something like that. And so everybody plans something. I mean, everybody, you plan in your own life. So I think I don't know if that's a very good answer.
Well, it wasn't a very good question either.
Well, no, but again, it's a cultural issue. So the thing is, so some people may want to call it policy or whatever works, again, to be rigid in your terminology, then you're getting in the way of communication. So I would give this example this was an area of Kentucky. They didn't like the word environment because it implied environmental protection, but their word for it was nature. So again, if you use the local language, so this is where, as a planner, you are a bit of an anthropologist because you got to figure out what the culture is. How do you communicate in this culture, or how do you get this culture to communicate to this culture? So there more disciplines have to be brought to bear to get the results that we want.
I think we are over.
Time for coffee.
Yes,
Yeah.
time for coffee. Continue this debate there. Thank you very much for
Thank
all
you.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.